In the early days of April 2011, a peculiar sight greeted the neighbors of house number 55 on Boulevard Robert Schumann in Nantes, France. The shutters of the Dupont-de-Ligonnes family home remained tightly closed, a stark contrast to their usual vibrant atmosphere. The absence of the usual sounds of laughter and play from the children and their pets raised concerns among the neighbors. Accustomed to the family's habit of leaving their shutters open, the closed windows prompted the worried neighbors to contact the local authorities. After several fruitless inspections, it was during the fifth visit that the police made a chilling discovery. Versailles, in the western suburbs of Paris, is where Xavier Dupont-de-Ligonnes was born on March 9, 1961. He was the eldest son of French Count Bernard Hubert Dupont-de-Ligonnes and his wife Geneviève Thérèse. In 1966, a daughter named Christine joined the family. After Bernard left his wife for another woman, Xavier stepped up to take care of his mother and sister. Geneviève believed she received divine messages, which she wrote down during automatic writing sessions reminiscent of a surrealist poet. Her unusual beliefs eventually turned into sermons about an impending apocalypse, leading her to create a cult called the Church of Philadelphia. The group included aristocrats who Geneviève convinced were chosen to survive the apocalypse and help rebuild the world. Christine was chosen by her mother to give birth to the Savior. According to Geneviève, the child would be a combination of Jesus and Satan, destined to bring salvation. Despite being the heir to his father's noble title, Xavier was more interested in luxury, fancy cars, and peculiarities than French traditions. He also had a great admiration for the United States. Geneviève supported Xavier's extravagant lifestyle with significant contributions from cult members who were sworn to secrecy. In 1974, on the idyllic island of Bréa, Xavier met Emmanuel Teneur. The two boys formed a strong bond of understanding that lasted a lifetime. It is said that Emmanuel even confessed his love for Xavier at that time, but despite the rejection, their friendship remained strong. 2 years later, Xavier met Agnès Hodanger. Agnès, born on November 9, 1962, in Neuilly-sur-Seine, near Paris, was known for her deep religious devotion and worked as an assistant at the Blanche de Castille Catholic School in Nantes, where she taught catechism. Although there is limited information available about her family background, it is well documented that Xavier and Agnès shared a close bond, resulting in a passionate yet short-lived romance before parting ways. In 1990, Agnès welcomed her first child, Arthur, from a casual relationship. Shortly after, she and Xavier rekindled their love, eventually tying the knot. Xavier embraced Arthur as his own child. 2 years later, they celebrated the arrival of their first biological son, Thomas, who would carry on the family name. To mark this special moment, Xavier selected Emmanuel as Thomas's godfather. Following Thomas, Agnès and Xavier expanded their family with 2 more children, Anne and Benoit. The family of 6 embodied the image of an ideal household, with Xavier portraying a caring father and the children excelling academically, hinting at a bright future ahead. Agnès was devoted to nurturing her children's faith, often taking them to church. She was perceived by other parents as gentle yet firm with her kids. Around 2000, Xavier relocated his family to the United States to align with their interests and preferences. Despite Xavier's discreet, charismatic, and multilingual nature, his attempt to seamlessly integrate in the U.S. proved unsuccessful, resulting in substantial financial setbacks. Upon their return to France, Xavier found himself burdened with mounting debts stemming from his somewhat ambiguous professional endeavors. Various inquiries have labeled him as a salesman. Reports from French media outlets indicate that financial issues had been a pressing concern for Xavier over the years. Among his unsuccessful ventures was a peculiar plan to import cars from the U.S. to France. He also ventured into several small businesses, such as a guide for sales representatives in the hotel and restaurant industry, a customer loyalty program for restaurants, an organization named the French Federation of Commerce, and a discreet enterprise where he held the title of manager. The financial situation of the last business venture was quite limited, prompting the hiring of 6 salespeople in 2003. Xavier's work commitments often kept him away from home during the weekdays, resulting in a modest income of approximately $4,200 annually. Over time, financial challenges began to strain his marriage, possibly exacerbated by common marital disagreements. Agnes extensively shared their struggles on a French forum in 2004, mentioning an unsettling comment made by Xavier about a family group death not being catastrophic. By 2009, the mounting debt significantly affected their relationship, leading to a temporary separation. During this period, Xavier sent numerous letters blaming Agnes for their family's problems and holding her accountable for their financial downfall. This emotional turmoil had a profound impact on Agnes, causing loss of appetite and insomnia. Xavier sought help from his friend Emmanuel on multiple occasions. Emmanuel, coming from a wealthy background, generously supported Xavier financially, despite living modestly in a small apartment. An enigmatic and somewhat eccentric individual, Emmanuel never hesitated to lend Xavier substantial amounts of money. Apart from financial aid, Emmanuel also financed Xavier's travels and co-signed for the house where Xavier eventually settled with his family. Thanks to Emmanuel's generosity in the late 2000s, the family lived in a chalet on 55 Boulevard Robert Schumann in the suburbs west of Nantes. Upon settling in, neighbors quickly formed the impression that Agnes was domineering and less amiable compared to her husband. Behind closed doors, Agnes faced a personal struggle, perceiving Xavier as both fragile and paradoxically rigid, almost militaristic. As the traditional head of the household, Xavier was emotionally distant, lacking tenderness and affection, and at times even abusive. Agnes shared her concerns about Genevieve's influence over Xavier with her friends from the Thursday prayer group. She described her mother-in-law as a troubled mystic, causing her deep fear. When Bernard passed away on January 20th, 2011, Xavier hoped for an inheritance due to his father's financial capacity. However, he was shocked to find almost nothing in his father's estate except for a few papers, a rifle, a card, a ring, and some cash, which Xavier took immediately. Shortly after Bernard's death, Xavier withdrew cash using his father's card and obtained a firearms license on February 2nd. By March 12th, he had purchased a silencer for the rifle and even bought quicklime. Xavier practiced shooting in his garden, explaining to his friend Emmanuel that the silencer was to avoid disturbing the neighbors. On April 1st, they went to a shooting range together, focusing on Bernard's inherited rifle. The next day, Emmanuel called Xavier multiple times, and they had a long conversation. Investigations suggest that the tragic events began on Sunday, April 3rd. That night, Xavier, Agnes, and their children went to the movies and had a pleasant dinner at a restaurant. Everyone was there except for Thomas, who was studying nearby. After returning home, neighbors saw them, and family members exchanged messages with friends. Xavier messaged Christine about their dinner. The prevailing theory is that Xavier drugged his family, waited for them to sleep, then shot and buried them in the garden, including the 2 Labrador dogs. Xavier meticulously crafted his alibi, starting on Monday morning by reaching out to individuals within his family circle. He made calls as early as 6 a.m., informing Agnes's workplace of her illness and contacting the children's schools with fabricated stories about their well-being. By midday, he even went as far as sending a letter to Arthur's workplace, stating that his son was resigning due to Xavier's transfer to Australia. However, Xavier still had to handle Thomas. On the same Monday, April 4th, he met with Thomas for dinner at a restaurant near his university residence. After the meal, a tired Thomas returned to his room. The next day, Thomas received a distressing message from his father, claiming Agnes was in a coma after a bicycle accident, prompting Thomas to rush to Nantes. It is suspected that Xavier murdered Thomas in the same manner as his other family members. Later that evening, Xavier had a conversation with Emmanuel, lasting just under 19 minutes. At midnight, a friend of Thomas received a message from him, stating he was watching a movie with his father at home. However, Thomas was likely already deceased by then. Approximately an hour later, Xavier emailed Emmanuel to arrange a meeting, with Emmanuel reminding him of the power of attorney and the key on the sailboat. Surprisingly, Xavier did not act discreetly, moving in and out of his house, leaving a note on the door, and making transactions with his credit cards under his real name. As Xavier's flawless escape plan unfolded, neighbors began to notice concerning signs. The chalet's once open windows had been shut for days. The local children no longer spotted the family's 4 kids. The dog's barking had stopped, and Agnes was nowhere to be found at work. It was as if they had all vanished into thin air. Concerned neighbors pieced together the clues and contacted the authorities. Upon arrival, officers found a nearly empty refrigerator with just a few jars of preserves. A still damp mop in the kitchen, a chess set on the living room table, and guitars on a sofa were also discovered. The Dupont-de-Ligonnes family seemed to have disappeared without a trace. Beds were stripped of sheets, picture frames were empty, and closets were devoid of clothes. In the midst of the mystery, a letter surfaced on April 9th, sent to family and friends. It claimed that Xavier had been recruited by the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration, and that the family had to go into hiding as part of a witness protection program, explaining their sudden disappearance and lack of contact. Neighbors grew suspicious and worried, feeling that something was amiss about the story. Fearing for the family's safety, they urged authorities to dig deeper. Meanwhile, Xavier set off on a journey through southern France in his car. As the case gained media attention, more details from the past came to light. On April 15th, security cameras captured Xavier entering a small hotel near Cannes. He parked his car, grabbed a bag, and vanished into the nearby woods. This was the last confirmed sighting of him. Interestingly, on the same day, Emmanuel called his mother, confessing hidden truths. He was gay, struggling with alcoholism, and battling depression. Responding to the neighbors' concerns and the lack of leads, authorities revisited the family home. On April 21, 2011, an officer noticed a freshly disturbed patch of earth under a terrace. They soon uncovered a concrete slab, and moments later made a chilling discovery. The corpses of Agnes and her 4 offspring were discovered ensconced in sacks, each bearing 2 to 3 bullet wounds and adorned with religious symbols. They were meticulously interred in burlap sacks with quicklime. The family's 2 Labradors were also laid to rest. Despite an exhaustive investigation, no traces of blood, fingerprints, or DNA were unearthed. Xavier swiftly became the most sought-after individual in France, accused of the heinous crime. His visage dominated the headlines, earning him monikers such as the Most Wanted Man, the Nantes Slayer, and the Epitome of Terror. However, he seemed to have inexplicably vanished without a trace. The post-mortem results of the 5 victims indicated to authorities that they were victims of a carefully orchestrated massacre. The majority of the bullets were aimed at their heads. Furthermore, traces of a sedative were detected in the children, supporting the theory that they were attacked while asleep. A shocking revelation emerged concerning Agnes. In the main bedroom, investigators discovered a device she used for her sleep apnea, which had ceased functioning precisely at 3:27 a.m. on April 4th. Investigators speculated that Xavier may have hesitated to harm Thomas, as he was the family's heir. Due to the strong bond between Xavier and Emmanuel, the latter was summoned by the authorities. Emmanuel appeared cooperative during the initial questioning, suggesting that Xavier's disappearance was a form of spiritual journey before taking his own life. When asked about the rifle, Emmanuel initially feigned ignorance. However, further scrutiny into his background uncovered discrepancies, leading authorities to realize that he was not entirely truthful. A significant breakthrough occurred 24 hours later. Just before noon, Nantes police raided Emmanuel's residence. They seized his laptop, prompting Emmanuel to divulge his true knowledge about Xavier's firearm. A subsequent examination of the hard drive unveiled extensive correspondence between Emmanuel and Xavier. The correspondence between them varied from the ordinary to the profound, with certain emails injecting a peculiar twist into their connection. One particular email, dispatched in the early hours of April 6th, piqued the interest of law enforcement. The accumulation of these intricate details prompted investigators to suspect that Emmanuel may have played a role in Xavier's escape. However, Emmanuel was not the sole individual under suspicion. Christine also came under the investigators' scrutiny during their questioning. Christine and Genevieve were evasive, presenting a superficial image of Xavier and denying any association with the Church of Philadelphia. Genevieve touched upon Xavier's upbringing, but steered clear of uncomfortable subjects like the origin of their wealth and adamantly refuted the existence of the sect. Nevertheless, the persistence of the investigative team paid off. They stumbled upon a copy of a complaint lodged years ago by former sect members who had fled in terror after Christine suggested engaging in relations with all the men to conceive the chosen one. This revelation about the sect, which boasted affluent members providing financial backing, proved to be pivotal. Investigators believed that this environment could have potentially offered Xavier logistical and material support. Consequently, all former members of the Church of Philadelphia were interrogated, and the sect's followers were closely monitored by the police in hopes of uncovering any slip-ups in their conversations or emails. Despite these extensive efforts, no concrete leads surfaced. Meanwhile, Xavier's cell phone records enabled authorities to track his movements within the country. The final tangible trace of Xavier was captured in a security footage from April 15th. Investigators speculated that he may have been carrying a weapon in his bag based on its shape. While all signs pointed towards the possibility of him having taken his own life in the woods, detectives were left perplexed as thorough searches in the dense forest failed to yield any trace of his body or remains. This led to the hypothesis that Xavier might have been picked up by a boat and transported to another country. Consequently, an international arrest warrant was issued on May 4th. The Nantes police reached out to the National Center for Fisheries Monitoring to investigate whether Emmanuel or Xavier possessed a motorboat or sailboat. Despite their efforts, no concrete evidence was found, acknowledging the possibility of outdated records. Emmanuel was called in for questioning on May 9th, which turned into an intense interrogation focused on locating a boat and identifying its owner. Unaware of the gravity of the situation, Emmanuel dismissed any suspicions when asked about a sailboat reference, attributing it to chance. He disclosed that Xavier had power of attorney to access his safe deposit box in case of an emergency, with the key hidden on a model sailboat in an apartment. Inside the safe was only his will. Disappointed and empty-handed, the police released Emmanuel, leaving the investigation in a state of uncertainty. Despite the peculiarities, he was considered a mere witness at that point. While deliberating on further interrogation, the police decided to exert some pressure on Emmanuel, deeming him the most reliable accomplice. A crucial development arose when investigators discovered a $4,200 check signed by Emmanuel for Xavier's company, leading to the revelation of an undisclosed account in Monaco. Efforts to obtain the account statements were hindered by Monaco's stringent banking privacy laws. On September 28th, 4 officers revisited Emmanuel's home, where they found him disoriented and barely recognizable, surrounded by a desolate environment marked by empty alcohol bottles. The absence of communication from his friend weighed heavily on Emmanuel's mind, adding to his distress. The authorities no longer viewed him as a suspect, but rather as a recluse, prompting them to question if they were on the wrong path. Xavier had transformed into one of France's most sought-after alleged criminals, possibly even on a global scale. In 2015, a journalist alleged to have received a letter from Xavier claiming he was still alive. Despite conducting handwriting, DNA, and fingerprint analyses, the note did not provide any new leads. On January 9, 2018, a monastery in Roquebrune-sur-Argent was raided by the police following a tip-off about a monk resembling Xavier. After an exhaustive 2-hour search, it was concluded that it was a case of mistaken identity. On January 18, 2019, Emmanuel passed away due to a heart attack. That same year, a man believed to be Xavier was apprehended at Glasgow Airport in Scotland. Once again, it was a case of mistaken identity. Another hypothesis proposed that Xavier could be in South America, particularly in Argentina, where his linguistic abilities and charm could aid him in blending in. Years have gone by, and the Church of Philadelphia not only endures, but has reportedly seen a resurgence. This secretive group, consisting of long-standing members who have secluded themselves from the world for nearly 4 decades, has been in the spotlight. In the summer of 2019, 2 siblings raised within the sect lodged fresh complaints against Christine and Genevieve. For 20 years, these women have staunchly asserted that Xavier is alive, innocent, and concealed in the United States under a witness protection program. They argue that everything mentioned in the letter dated April 9th is entirely fabricated. While this may appear to be denial, it could also be a tactic to mask certain realities. Since 2011, the case has been shrouded in conjecture and erroneous leads, leading authorities through endless mazes. The burning question remains: will justice ever be served for Agnes and her offspring? Despite the grim prospects, there are those who hold on to the belief that the truth will eventually be unveiled.
This case started on a freezing Saturday night in December 1991 in Austin, Texas. 2 17-year-old girls named Eliza Thomas and Jennifer Harbison were co-workers at the I Can't Believe It's Yogurt store at the North Cross Mall. It was almost 11 o'clock at night, and their shift was about to end. A little bit after 10 o'clock, Jennifer's sister, 15-year-old Sarah Harbison, and her friend, 13-year-old Amy Ayers, were hanging around the mall. They were waiting for the girls' shift to end since the 4 of them were going to a slumber party together that night. To avoid being late to the party, Sarah and Amy entered the store to assist Eliza and Jennifer close up in time. It was already 12 o'clock, and Officer Troy Gay of the Austin Police Department was on patrol that evening when he saw smoke coming from the strip mall. Firefighters quickly arrived on the scene after the officer called in. They soon discovered a horrifying scene while putting out the fire. In the store, the lifeless bodies of Jennifer, Sarah, Amy, and Eliza were strewn across the floor. It was obvious that they had been ruthlessly murdered. The teenagers were all bound and gagged in their own clothes while completely naked. Jennifer, Sarah, and Eliza were found in the rear of the back room, huddled into one corner, while Amy's body was recovered in the middle of the back room. Sarah and Eliza were piled on top of one another, and Jennifer was lying nearby. The girls' legs were wide open, and one of them had an ice cream scoop tucked in between it. The killer or killers had gathered napkins and other combustible materials from about the shop, doused the victims with lighter fluid, and then set the place on fire before escaping, leaving their bodies almost completely burned beyond recognition. Their autopsy results revealed that they had all been shot execution-style in the back of the heads. Additionally, 2 or more of the girls had experienced sexual assault. Authorities also disclosed to the media that 2 firearms had been used in the killings, raising the possibility of at least 2 killers. Police investigators and the management of the yogurt shop determined that $540 or so was taken from the shop. It was unclear if the girls had been targeted particularly because someone knew they would be alone inside the store that night, or if the intended purpose had been a robbery, and the culprit had then recognized a chance to take advantage of them. Lead detective John Jones and his partner, Mike Huckabee, launched an immediate investigation into the case. There were several problems with the investigation right away. First of all, the firefighters who responded to the crime scene did their jobs, but ultimately washed away important forensic evidence in the process. Furthermore, Austin had only 1 fingerprint unit at the beginning of the 1990s, which lacked forensic expertise. Additionally, there was only 1 homicide investigator working the shift the night of the murders due to the limited number of the city's homicide squad. Despite the police department's shortcomings, Detectives Jones and Huckabee had quite a large number of suspects. The police station's phones were ringing non-stop as tips poured in. When faced with 342 suspects and scores of fake confessions, the investigators became overwhelmed. The investigators started by looking into possible local serial killers due to the graphic nature of the crime and the staging of the teenagers' bodies. This led them to Kenneth Allen McDuff. Kenneth Allen McDuff was a Texas serial killer who is thought to have committed at least 14 murders. On August 6, 1966, he was found guilty of killing 3 teenagers named Robert Brand, Mark Dunman, and Edna Louise Sullivan. These killings were known as the broomstick murders, because Edna's neck was broken like a broomstick after she had been sexually abused numerous times. For his crimes, Kenneth Allen McDuff was given a death sentence, but in 1972, the U.S. Supreme Court decided to end the death penalty in a 5-4 ruling, and his sentence was altered to life in prison with the chance of parole. He was granted parole in 1989 as a result of prison overpopulation. It is however believed that Kenneth Allen McDuff further committed numerous killings upon his parole, including the 1992 slaying of Melissa Ann Northrup, a 22-year-old Texan. After many years of eluding authorities, McDuff was ultimately apprehended and put on death row. On November 17, 1998, the day before he was put to death, he admitted to killing the 4 teenagers at the yogurt store. He was foolish if he believed that making this last-minute confession would save his life. That day, as planned, he was put to death. Detectives looked into McDuff's confession but disregarded him when fingerprints and hair taken from the yogurt store could not be used to identify him as the killer. Days after the brutal killing of the girls, investigators received a tip to look into a teenager named Maurice Spears. Maurice Spears was a 16-year-old boy who was spotted with a gun that night at the North Cross Mall where Sarah and Amy were hanging out before going to the yogurt store. The weapon was a handgun with a .22 caliber, the same caliber as one of the weapons used to kill the girls. However, nothing came out from the lead when detectives Jones and Huckabee questioned Pierce along with his 3 friends who accompanied him to the mall. Ballistics analysis of Maurice Spears's gun revealed that it did not match the murder weapon. Additionally, just like with McDuff, none of the 4 suspects were identified by the fingerprints and hair samples taken from the crime site. The detectives eventually moved on from this. The case was given to new detectives after years went by without any arrests. Then, in 1999, Forrest Wellburn, Michael Scott, Robert Springsteen, and Maurice Spears, 4 earlier suspects now in their 20s, were apprehended for the killings at the yogurt store. These were the same suspects who had been questioned 8 days prior to the girls' deaths and had been let go due to a lack of evidence. Michael Scott, one of the suspects, admitted to the murders. He wasn't alone though. Robert Springsteen also admitted to killing the girls and raping one of them. The police were sure they had their killers after these confessions. According to the theory, the 4 boys had intended to rob the yogurt shop. Forrest Wellburn waited outside and kept watch as Michael Scott, Robert Springsteen, and Maurice Spears entered the store. The theft went horribly wrong, though, and all of the females were killed. The allegations against Wellburn were dropped after the authorities made 2 attempts to indict him for the killings, but were unable to do so due to a lack of evidence connecting him to the crime. Charges against Maurice Spears were also dropped due to a lack of evidence, which was extremely difficult for the police and the families of the victims to accept, because he was thought to be the mastermind behind the crime and the subsequent killings. Both Robert Springsteen and Michael Scott were found guilty of capital murder after separate trials for the yogurt store killings. The state of Texas had approved a new death penalty statute, making it feasible for Robert Springsteen to receive the death penalty even after the Supreme Court decision in 1972. But Michael Scott received a 99-year jail sentence. However, shortly after their trials, grave questions were presented that showed Springsteen and Scott might not have been guilty. In the beginning, there was no tangible proof connecting any of them to the crime. Both men added that their confessions had been forced upon them, and there was some proof to support their assertions. One of the detectives working on the case was reassigned after it was claimed that he had forced confessions in an unrelated case. Additionally, a picture of another Austin police officer aiming a gun at Scott's head during questioning surfaced. Both convictions were overturned by the courts after they determined that they had violated Springsteen and Scott's Sixth Amendment right to confront their accuser. This came 15 years after the yogurt shop killings were perpetrated. During the trial, Michael Scott and Robert Springsteen's confessions were used against each other, but their attorneys were never permitted to cross-examine the accuser. It was determined that their constitutional rights had been violated as a result. Later, in 2008, DNA testing on the evidence gathered from the crime scene revealed that neither Scott nor Springsteen's DNA, nor that of any other persons accused of the crime, matched the results. According to then Travis County District Attorney Rosemary Lemberg, the yogurt store murder was committed by Scott and Springsteen, but the men would not be charged again until the unknown man linked to the DNA evidence at the crime scene was located. The majority of law enforcement officials continue to believe that the original four suspects were the culprits and that the DNA evidence implicating a fifth suspect was a fabrication. The fifth suspect argument, according to Michael Scott and Robert Springsteen's defense attorneys, is absurd, and they emphasized that no one ever brought up a fifth suspect before the inconvenient DNA results came in. According to some attorneys, investigators, family members, and armchair detectives who have studied this case, the killers of the teenagers may have been two unnamed customers who were at the yogurt store right before it closed. Although 52 customers who had come into the store on the day of the murders were reportedly questioned by the police, two individuals who witnesses said were present at closing time have never been located. 3 customers left the store shortly before it closed, and on their way out, they reportedly saw 2 males seated in a booth, and they didn't appear to be planning to leave anytime soon. Perhaps the men ordered a soft drink. When Jennifer and her co-worker decided to close the store, at least one of the customers witnessed her lock the front door and post a closed sign to prevent any additional customers from coming in. After all the other customers had left, only the 2 men in the booth remained. Witnesses gave the following descriptions of the persons of interest. One is around 5 foot 6 inches tall and has lighter hair, maybe like a dirty blonde. He seemed in his late 20s through early 30s. The second man is noted as being larger. Both were dressed in larger jackets, one of which was green, an army fatigue kind of looking jacket. The other had a black jacket. Neither of these males has been named as of yet. In the end, it is debatable if robbery was really the true motivation in this instance. It is difficult to believe that these killings were just the outcome of a robbery gone wrong, given the meager sum of money seized and the high level of violence. The likelihood that the murder was committed with sexual motivation, and that the murderers only grabbed the money as an afterthought, is substantially higher. It's possible that one of the girls knew the murderers, or it's possible that Sarah and Amy were followed from the mall to the yogurt store. Linking the DNA evidence discovered at the scene to the 2 male customers who were observed by witnesses lingering in the yogurt shop after closure could hold the key to solving this case. The 1991 murders at the yogurt business altered the city of Austin irrevocably. The murders were referred to by the then mayor as the crime where Austin lost its innocence. Residents of Austin began to doubt the safety of their community after the brutal, and untimely deaths of 4 young girls who still had their entire lives ahead of them. The I Can't Believe It's Yogurt store was converted into a nail salon, but a plaque honoring Jennifer Hobison, Sarah Hobison, Amy Ayers, and Eliza Thomas still stands in the parking lot beneath a large oak tree, serving as a reminder to anybody passing by that the murder case is yet to be solved and that justice is yet to be served. What do you think about this case, friends? Who do you think killed the girls? Let me know what your thoughts are in the comments, and please like and support my channel by subscribing.